since it is so vast and it's been what almost 20 years since you've been a professional, it would be great to maybe have a brief sort of walkthrough of who you are, what your journey has been like, and to look at some of the key roles, the transitions that you've experienced, over the past nearly 2 decades, to briefly set context before we get into the meat of the session.
Sure. So, long time back, when I was starting my career, I wrote my CV, right? And it was, I think, 3 pages long, right? And I gave it somewhere, asked somebody to review it, and they said a very nice thing that, unless you are the Secretary of State of US, there is nothing that you have done in life that cannot be summarized in 1 page, right? I have taken that to heart. Even today, my CV, no matter how much experience is 1 page, right? You toy with the margin and font size, whatever. And so here also, let me just try to keep it very brief, right? Yeah, I grew up in Kota, born in UP, grew up in Kota, in a small town, especially in Kota. Even 20 years back, you have three career options. You can become a doctor, you can become an engineer, or you can become a disgrace to your family, right? You choose. So I chose to be an engineer, not necessarily, but simply because I didn't like biology much, and maths and physics were at least tolerable. Right? Went to IIT Bombay, didn't study at all, right? Did all the nonsense that you can do. Then got a job in Procter and Gamble, Japan in R&D. Right, very very privileged to kind of get there because very few people would sort of go there. Probably the lowest CPI in history to get that job. I got there, started working on hair conditioners. I had some hair back then. Uh, then realized it is not a lot of fun, and Japan is a tough place for outsiders, and I was just a little too young and restless to tolerate that. They were setting up a new R&D center in India. Japan at that time was the only R&D center in Asia. So they were setting up a new center. They called, they were reaching out to expats at different levels to come back and build that. So I said, okay, wow, this is great opportunity. Some 10, 15 of us got together from around the world, set up base in Bangalore, right? And that's where I just got a taste of what starting up really means, right? From a 10,000 people office to a small bungalow, of 10, 15 people, right? Trying to establish the credibility of India to the PNG universe, which is vast, right? Did that for around 2.5 years. Had a lot of fun. Had no idea what to do next. Went to business school, right? Good time. You spend some money, you get some, chill time, party, and hopefully think about the next things in life, right? Uh, but then there, MBAs are again, that they have become so mechanical in nature, right? That you go there, then you automatically you start thinking about what next. I want to do consulting. Why? Nobody has an answer. I want to do finance. No, why? Well, yes, it pays well, whatever, right? And so coming from PNG, which was itself a very fairly large established company, I just could not find any excitement in any of the roles that were coming for campus. Right. So in 2010, when the placement process was about to start, I actually just signed off. Right. I said, "Ki, I just can't do anything that comes here. I don't want to go to McKinsey. I don't want to go to any bank, and I don't want to go and make soap for some other company." Right. So now what to do next? Right. So I said, "Okay, let's start something." Right. What to start? No idea. Right. So started thinking about multiple businesses. Healthcare is somewhere I just somehow just felt a connection, that we can do something. We can do something impactful. When you are young, you are fairly stupid as well, right? You go a lot with what your heart says than what your head says, right? So we said, okay, let's do healthcare. I We zeroed down on dialysis as an idea. Started building out dialysis clinics in tier two, tier three uh, uh, cities in India. 6 years, we were India's second largest chain. 2016 got bought out by Fresenius, which is world's largest dialysis company. Worked with them for a little while, and then took a break. Right, and said that okay, maybe let's try to retire. And then there was just a chance meeting I had with Bhavish, and he just said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing really." He said, "Okay, just come over." That was the last time in my life when I was not doing anything, because after that, I was just doing so much. In those 2 years, I ran everything at Ola except electric, almost everything, right? And what typically happens, you just get tired of that, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. You do it for 2 years, you have very little left in you after that. So stepped out, joined Tata's. They were launching Tata New, uh, built healthcare, sort of, grew 1mg business on Tata New for them, started building some new businesses and all, right? But then I think again the whole purpose thing stuck, right? That sending groceries to people in 10 minutes is not my idea of life, right? It's a perfectly noble thing to do. People who are doing it, all power to them. I am a power consumer, right? But that's not something that I essentially want to do, right? So I just felt like getting back to healthcare. And when this opportunity came with the 2070 Health and W Health, just took a plunge, right? And yeah, so it's been like 4 months now. Enjoying it. It's very, very new for me, investing, uh, plus a lot of operating, right? So, but just trying to find the groove, and not my first time, throwing myself into completely unknown random things. So hopefully it will work out well. Let's see.
Awesome. Thank you so much for, that very candid and sort of like blunt intro, right, on what you've done and why you decided to make these choices. I think it's a great segue into the first segment of this conversation, right, which is to sort of understand from you, what do you think, about organization, about culture. These are big words. People use them all the time. Very few people know what they actually mean. So, from someone who's seen culture across various organizations at different scale, it'd be absolutely awesome to understand, how have these sort of experiences, right, working at companies of different scale, how have you thought about organization, about culture across companies at different scale, and how have these experiences, right, sort of contributed to you becoming an ops leader, right, which is what you stand as today, very clearly in the industry. So maybe we'll sort of start with that and sort of try and understand whether it's a large company, whether it's a startup, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, sort of how are these things important, how are they relevant, how do they fit?
Sure. So, of course, companies are very, very different the way they behave at different sizes, right? And I will continue to use this theme about that company is a living organism, right? It is born, it grows, eventually dies, right? So let's start with big companies because that's where I started my career, right? I think what you see there is you learn a lot of planning and structure, right? People are very deliberate about things. Nothing gets done impulsively. They are, of course, at most of these places, it is taken to extreme, which leads to a lot of bureaucracy and slow movement. But at the core, they are very meticulous about things. They plan a lot. They also focus a lot on people, right? Because eventually, if you don't focus on people and culture, the gears of the organization uh, don't move, right? And because it is such a complicated organism, right, all the gears have to move, and they're all essentially people, right? So there's a lot of focus, and that's why the whole the HR bit, and from old time, the whole industrial relationship, and all those things happened because you just need to, it is not an option. If people are dissatisfied, in a small company, you can just get them all together, throw a beer party, just cry a little bit, right, and move on with life, right? But that doesn't happen in a large organization, which PNG, for example, presence in say 200 countries, right? If you don't have strong system and strong culture, it just doesn't work, right? Uh, Third is, I think, just a lot of diplomacy, right? That you can be tough, but you don't have to be nasty, right? A lot, so people learn a lot of, smarts around how to be tactful, how to get your point across in a manner which is not hurtful or insulting, but you get your point across, right? And I have seen people rising up the ranks, who are like not really the smartest of the people, right? But they are just absolute great leaders, right? And they are able to get a lot of work done, and that is only possible if you are able to communicate very effectively, right? The last thing I would say is patience, right? So large companies have a lot of patience, right? They are not in a hurry to do anything, right? Of course, it works a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't work, right? But again, because of the size, you have to be a little patient. From small companies, uh, I've the most important thing is the sense of purpose and mission. Is very very clear when you're operating in a small company, right? It gets really lost, right? For example, as I said that in PNG, while there are hundreds and thousands of people, I could never resonate with the purpose and mission of the company, right? But I could see people, and people who would resonate, and they will just, if the product launch goes great or if there's a customer feedback, I could see people, crying literally because they just felt so much love about it. They cared about it, right? I just could not bring myself to care about that purpose, right? But in a small company, you have no option. You join something because you sort of believe in the purpose, right? Other is hustle, right? So in a small company, hustle is paramount because similarly, like for a small child, right? The metabolism is really really fast, right? Everything in the body is just moving and evolving very very fast, right? So that's just the nature of a small organism, the frugality, uh, you know, more or less, some people are very, very few people are lucky who are able to raise very, very large seed rounds and series A round, but most of them just have to grind through with very little money for very long time, right? Which we also had to do, right? And so, how do you just make, uh, make little resources work for you over the long time, right? Like probably the money we spent over the first 3 years, was lesser than one small event that PHG would host, and throw us a nice dinner party at some ITC or Taj, right? I mean, like it's just that. And lastly, I think it's just the adrenaline, right? It's just the thrill of creation, right? That you just can't get in a very very large setup. That's something that just comes from being in a small setup, being very cohesive and intimate unit. And then, so when you mix all these things up, right? I think that has really helped me, span all these experiences and just try to take the best bits of everywhere, right? And then kind of continue to apply whatever works best in any situation. So just the arsenal that I have been able to collect over these years has benefited a lot from these varied experiences.
So in a way, you could almost say that, say, having worked in a very large place where you have these systems, where you have these, where leadership is almost, a practice, right? In certain ways, it gives you some sense of, what good can look like. But then you have to operate very differently with much lesser resources, more frugal capacity when you're doing things at a smaller um, organization, right? Were there any specific experiences, during your times at, say, any of the larger companies, or when you were doing something yourself, that stands out, that was sort of like pivotal moments that you can recall, which had a pretty solid impact, right, on how it's just shaped the way in which you lead teams, in which you interact with people who work with you, work for you, right? Would be also interesting to understand before we maybe get in to some of the more conceptual sides where we can role play some of these things with the folks on the call.
Sure. So, of course, in PNG, for example, I was just like a very very small cog in a very large wheel, and there was no. I left that company quite early, right? I think that the place where I had a real sort of leadership experience was when I was building my own company, right? Where you literally started from two people, and grew it to 500 people over time. So it is like uh, uh, you put a frog in a glass of water and you slowly heat it, right? And it just you don't realize, and then it just becomes fairly agitated later. But so that was one. Second was Adola, right? Where out of nowhere, many things happen. One is 3 4 months after my joining, COVID struck. Right. And that was a pivotal moment, right? For a company which is essentially about people going out of the house, right? Your business essentially goes down to zero. From billions, it is zero, right? And to keep that machine running, you have thousands of people, right? So I had a span of more than 2,000 people there, right? And then how do you go about navigating it? Right? That there are, of course, some painful decisions that have to be taken, right? Because unfortunately, for a company that is not making profits, right, you need to let some people go. But then people who are staying, and people who have either chosen to stay or you have made them stay, right? How do you make sure that they continue to feel positive about what's going to happen? Because when we were like in peak COVID, nobody had any idea whether what is going to happen. This is going to be life for next 10, 20 years, or this is going to be next few weeks. Who knows, right? So how do you sort of just keep that momentum going, right? And so what we did was we thought that, okay, maybe this is a great time to reevaluate everything that we have done since the company has begun, right? That there are so many systems, so many inefficiencies that are there, which probably we can just relook at peace, right? And that moment of peace is very important, because when there is constant hustle going on, constant activity going on, you just can't sit down and think that what is the thing to do. You're just doing it because you just have to keep the thing running, right? So that way it was, I would say, a blessing to some extent, that we just got 4 5 months of mentally free time to be able to just restructure the business and make it look very, very different internally. Externally, it is always going to be the same. You're going to have an app, you're going to have a driver come to you, pick you up, and drop you somewhere, right? But internally, how everything gets done, how teams are structured, how products are designed, and all that. And when business started to pick up, all these things then started bearing fruits, right? So for that 6 months of time, you just have to kind of keep telling people that this is what we are trying to do. This is how it is going to impact, right? Let's just keep our heads down, focus on that, and let's see what happens, right? And it's of course, morale sometimes runs very, very low, and you just have to kind of keep at it, right? So that was, I would say, one of the most uh, excruciating as well as fun times that we had. The challenge is very, very large. We have operations across 4 countries, thousands of people. How do we just make sure that when things go back to normal, which they eventually will, that we are in a better shape than how we started?
I think most people here either started their careers, during COVID, or were very early in them, right? I remember I was at the factory during COVID. I think Shogoto was at a construction site in Pune,
Yeah.
right? Tejasvi was building satellites, right? And it was all very crazy for us at that point of time. I remember not going home for 13 months, social distancing, right? Which is something that we don't really think about anymore. And just, whether you're wearing a mask, whether you're coughing or sneezing. Yeah, it was an absolutely crazy time. But thank you for, sharing this with us. Not many people would have known, what it sort of was like to be the person, the point person rather, in ops at as a company, as you said, whose business it was to get people moving. I think it's become very clear from what you've said so far that there are ways in which organizations do things. There are approaches towards sort of doing things the right way and the wrong way. And I think with that segue, we'll get into like sort of the first conceptual piece which people were very keen on understanding, right? Which is, how do you sort of build a team? How do you manage people? How do you hire? And this entire aspect of a culture, right? How do you actually go about and build it in a way that it becomes useful for your large organization, your startup, your team, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Maybe the first thing that we could understand from you, and it'd be awesome if you could play back an example to the audience and give them a chance to maybe put themselves in their shoe, is maybe first define what do you sort of think, what is culture, right? Very importantly, for you, what does it mean to you? And in any of the different roles that you've done, where you had to sort of either change or build culture, how did you do that, right? Because I think this whole aspect of getting so many people in an org to align, for them to fall in line, to agree fundamentally with what leadership wants, is one of the hardest things that a lot of folks here in the community are facing in their roles. So maybe that would be one of the solid sort of starting points to define culture, and then give us an example of how you built it or changed it at any of the different places that you were at.
Sure. So see, culture, very difficult to define, right? The way I think of it, right, is that culture is a belief system, or a value system in an organization that helps you eventually get to where you want to be, right? So, you know, and you cannot have uniform culture in very different, types of organizations, right? So, what, for example, Elon Musk is trying to do, you know, you cannot do it with the culture of what Procter and Gamble does, right? And people are very quick to associate things like toxic, non-toxic, like those kind of things. But it is, I think it's just too simplified, a version of that, right? It is, uh, people should, and that's why it's very, very important that you are very careful in hiring the right kind of people in your organization, right? Because uh, a lot of hiring that happens is competence based, right? And I think competence in today's world is basic hygiene. You of course have to be competent at what you do, right? But what is very, very important is that you deeply believe in the mission and vision and the purpose of the company that you are joining, right? Most of the cases, founders have a very clear vision and the purpose of why they are doing it, and they have to be very careful in the kind of people they bring in to sort of fulfill that vision, right? uh, that's when the theme that runs all across the board, and people are aligned, and it's a good culture, right? Because everybody is hustling towards that, and nobody minds when things sort of get a little rough, because otherwise, when the motivations are essentially extrinsic, when it is about money, when it is about promotion, when it's about career, it is when people start putting themselves before the mission, you know, that's when it gets toxic, right? And I believe then when people put mission before themselves and people feel the innate desire to do that themselves, that is, I would say, one of the signs of a great culture, right? Then it doesn't matter whether it is 120 hours a day or 70 hours a day or 40 hours a day. I think that is just a very, uh, very simplistic way of putting things, right? Uh, I'll uh, I'll pose a scenario. This is a very fantastic, event that happened during Ola times, again around COVID. So we were into the leasing business, right? So there was a company called Ola Fleet Technologies, right, which owned 40,000 cars, on our balance sheet, spread across, I think, 30 odd cities, uh, right? These are all leased out to drivers, okay, uh, and to be run on Ola platform. Now we got a hint that this lockdown is coming, right? And there was a practice day that happened, some Janta Bandh or something. I don't remember the exact term, but 1 week before the lockdown was announced. right? So when that happened, suddenly we realized that if suppose we go in a lockdown, and we of course don't know how long the lockdown is going to be, all the cars that are out leased to the drivers, what is going to happen to them? Because they don't own the asset, right? The asset is owned by us. Anything can happen, right? And we and we also don't know that when the lockdown is going to start. It can be tomorrow, it can be 1 month ago, right? What would you know what would you do in such a scenario, right? So of course, preservation of the asset was paramount, because it's a lot of money, right, on the table, right? And you just can't, because the other thing is that uh, we would you can't leave the vehicle in the hands of the driver, because these are desperate times, right? So even the best of the people, when desperate, can do anything, right? uh, the core team assembled, right? uh, we just set camp in our office, 4 days home, right? We activated the entire Ola setup across the country. We leased out. So every acre roughly can park 220 cars, right? We leased out space to store these 40,000 cars. We reached out to all the drivers. You know, we gave them whatever needs to be assured in terms of no lease, etc., etc. Got all these cars back, right? 90. So in 4 days, we got 90% of the cars back to our uh, warehouses, right? Which were negotiated and hired at that particular moment itself, right? In short, there is safety and security for them. In short, that there are maintenance protocols being implemented across these works, right? And then, of course, all the negotiations with the leasing partners, extending some certain kind of insurance benefits to our driver partners. All that happened 4 days, right? For the 10% of the cars that didn't come in, the teams continued to search for those cars for the next 2 years, right? Out of which we recovered another 5-6%. So essentially, still some got lost, a very small number, right? But that's the kind of effort that we sort of put in to get that in those 4 days, right? And that's just you can say driven by uh, the purpose that we just have to make sure that the company stays in business when things get normal, right? And uh, I think it was one of the most amazing things that at least I have seen getting pulled off in my career. Just the sheer scale of it, the sheer insanity of what we were trying to do, right? So and so yes, it was it tough. It was very, very tough, right? Would anybody clearly no one on this call thought of that this could be pulled off, right? But you do those things when you are in the sort of right sort of culture and with the right set of people who share those values, right? And then nobody's asking me ki, what about 40 hours, what about 70 hours? When something needs to be done, it needs to be done.
So I mean, in a way, then this set context to the team that mission critical, what that sort of means, and that the top priority is we have to preserve these assets. Like that is super important in a way, and probably it also sent a very strong message to folks who are your driver partners that Ola really cares about their cars, and that they will take the vehicles off of your hands, free you from your burden. They'll figure out the things on the lease side because they care about the relationship as well, and they want you to sort of continue to be Ola partners, and that you don't have to struggle, right, on behalf of the company in certain ways, right, which was probably really, really important cultural ethos to sort of set. Maybe the next question that to sort of answer, right, is probably none of this would have been possible if you didn't have a team of the type that you had in place at
Yeah.
Ola, right? From leadership to your ground staff to whoever, right, was involved in planning, deciding, and then executing this entire thing. So one of the things, that folks really wanted to understand is, how do you sort of think about designing your organization, right? Like, it's not just a number of people and that roles that you have to fill. It has to link to what you want to get out of the company as well, right? So, as someone who had a span of 2000 people, who was constantly building, rebuilding teams, saw the entire transition through COVID. Probably things were definitely not the same before and after. Be useful for us to understand your perspective, on building a team, on turning an org chart from a static, from an Excel or a flow chart into a living, breathing organization and using it to deliver objectives. Would love to get your perspective on what was the org design at Ola that allowed you to pull this off. Be super curious to understand that.
So, so again, as I said, org design uh, is not straightforward, right? It is, again, it all boils down to what you are trying to do. What kind of company are you building? You know, is it a technology focused company? Is it an operations focused company? Right? Is it a design focused company? Right? And your org chart has to reflect that, right? That people who will have the most impact on the prospects of the company have to have the most representation on the senior leadership end, right? So if technology is going to make or break things, right, then your top engineers and your top product managers have to be in the room when key decisions are taken, right? When you are when it's highly operational, right, then you need to have solid ops people being there. You need to understand the nitty-gritties of those businesses, right, to be able to take the right decision, right? It is seldom that people who are very analytical or people who are not on the ground are able to take the best business decisions, right? And we have seen this theme sort of coming again and again. What, for example, Nike is going through right now, it's all over the news, right? That if people don't really understand the business, believe in the business, then the right decisions just don't get taken, right? So, org design eventually boils down to, do you have the right people at the right places, and they are being heard, right? So it is not hiring the top people, giving them the best salary, but making them sit in a corner with, their voice is not getting heard, right? You need to have the max representation of the most important people, and on the other side, you also should have the smallest org possible. That's my personal philosophy to achieve any objective, right? That put the org design in place, be very, very deliberate about what everybody is going to do there, right? Hire the best you can, right? So that, everybody has enough leverage to produce something much bigger than they can individually do, right? And uh, build an org over the system design, right? And the system has to be such a way that it enables people to do a lot more, right? Because throwing people at the problem is one of the easiest thing you can do, which essentially comes to bite you back, right? So I have never believed throwing people at the problem. Let us start with what is the absolute minimum number of people required to do something, and then let's just build from there, right? And strengthen, whatever tools, systems, etc., required for them to do their job. Right. So that's how I think about org design in that.
That's
No,
quite interesting. Like when you're saying that you really first focus on the problem that has to be solved rather than just hiring people to fit into those roles. So here I've actually been in two different scenarios in two different companies where they had two different ideologies. I wanted to. It's a bit of a subjective question. I wanted to know your views on this. So there was one particular organization I was in where people were hired to fit in two roles. Right. So that is, we have a vacancy. Let's go into the market and get the perfect person for this. I also was part of another company where they did the exact opposite. They looked for people And then they, according to the capability of those people, they assign them roles. Like, so the JD was absolutely blank. Like, क्या करना है नहीं पता, तुम्हारा capabilities के हिसाब से we'll decide. If you look like a good candidate, we'll hire you, and then we figure out what you have. So I've seen both of these scenarios. There's definitely positives and negatives. So I just want to know, what are your thoughts about hiring this way?
No, so like I think it's too much of a gamble with people's careers or with your company itself, right? So I would be very very clear of what I'm looking for in somebody. What do they need to do, right? And as I said earlier, you hire for competence, and you hire for their belief in why they want to be somewhere, right? Because eventually, I have seen, no matter how big the organization, the magic happens with probably a single digit number of people, who basically tie it all together, right? And you have to be very, very careful, that anybody in that link or thereafter is just in there for the right reasons. Right. So yeah, so that way I'm a little, I go very, very slow on the hiring front, being very deliberate.
Thank you, Gaurav. That was quite interesting, to sort of get your view, right, on how you do these things. One of the things people keep talking about is, even if you hire even companies, that have often hired the best talent, even though they've tried to fit people into their roles, somehow, somewhere, things have often not worked for a lot of organizations, right? And then they've imploded, and then people have left, and it's just been very unfortunate for everyone. So one of the things to sort of understand, right, that especially folks who are at startups or who are founders here in the call or in the org who will watch the recording later, um, how do you sort of think about performance, right? What is high performance? How do you, I mean, you already explained to us how you think about getting the people, but once they are already in the organization, right, how do you enable them? How do you build capability? How do you sort of, nurture their skill sets, their ambitions? Of course, there's a thought process, right? People get very good at their jobs. They suddenly think that, hey, I could be doing something better. They leave. But at the same time, if you don't foster growth, people will probably leave anyways, right? So how do you think about enablement, about building capability, about nurturing ambition to sort of drive, this kind of performance in an organization? Is, I think, a very, very important question that the audience would sort of like to understand from you. And if there's an example here in some ways that can be played back to the audience, it would be awesome. But, to you, however you'd want to answer this question.
Sure. So let me just take a step back and just probably complete just the hiring point, and then we'll stitch it back to it, right? That one is that you just need to hire absolutely the best, right? And somebody really put it in very, very nice way. One of the famous entrepreneurs, I'm forgetting, but who said that? I think it's Aaron Levy. That A's hire A's, okay, B's hire C's, right? So the downfall of your company starts the day when the first B is hired, okay? Because then suddenly it just starts degrading, right? So that's very, very critical, that you are ensuring that only the best people are coming in, right? Which means whatever criterias you have. And the team that you are forming is truly an A team, because, first of all, A players only want to play with A players, right? And that is just the basic, I would say, human need, that you want to be winning, you know and you can't make Ronaldo play uh, in a tier C tier D team. You can give him all the money in this world, but I don't think that he would like to do that, right? So first, the assembly of the team is very, very important, right? Second is, then to your point, how do you enable capabilities and all that, right? I feel the only way to do that, and of course, it's you are trying to figure out the art of possible, that what can a person do, right? And one of the things that has helped me in this, right, is one of my superpowers. which is being absolutely lazy, right? So if I can delegate something, I just do it, right? Without giving second thoughts about it. Even if I can do it, I still delegate, right? Because uh, you need to throw people at the deep end of the pool, right? Of course, you have to be standing there with a with a lifebuoy if something goes wrong. But you need to just constantly give people assignments and challenges that they are constantly out of their depth, uh, right? Because, but ensuring that they don't feel insecure about it, right? That you are there, that they understand that it is something that they they're expected to ace, but nothing goes wrong if there are mistakes made in the process.
So stretch goals are very clearly defined as
Then
stretch goals,
as
right?
stretch
This
goals.
is base, this is stretch, but that
Stretch.
stretch is what allows
Uh,
people to grow
uh,
effectively in a way.
uh.
Got it.
Yeah, no, so no, and there is no base. There is no base. There is only, you give top-down goals. Of course, you sometimes sit with the team to build bottom-up goals, and then you add a little painful premium on top of that, and give that, right, just because to see how far can we go. Because the last thing that I want is that I myself am a bottleneck in the progress, that I myself come in the way of progress because of the mental constraint that I am personally facing, right? Those constraints might not be shared across, right? And everybody operates in their own paradigm of constraints, right? So why should I dictate that what you can or cannot do, right? So let's just go and see what happens. If it doesn't work out, we'll recalibrate, right? And I have seen that if you are able to do that continuously, and for that, of course, you have to continuously keep your game up, right? That you should be able to think 2 3 steps ahead, right? To be able to give people those goals, because otherwise people will start complaining that is the guy on coke or something, right? So of course you need to be on control. You need to be sure that things will not really break if mistakes happen. They just you have a hands on.
Yeah. I was just relating to what you said about hire the best people, right? You hire the best people, and obviously, um, the goals are much clearer. But I've been in situations where there's just a lot of pressure to hire now. We need this project to start immediately. We need people to work on this immediately. And while it's also challenging to find the niche sort of engineers that for the projects that we work on.
Yeah.
How do I navigate this? How is it always better to wait for it?
Uh, so there is nothing that is always true, right? So uh, it always pays to plan as much as possible, right, for these exigencies, because you will end up. It is important, if something needs to get done, if you need people, you need to hire in a hurry. That's perfectly okay, right? But I think you should learn from this, and it's a constant process. You need to learn, you need to plan things better, so that you are just this is one thing I do not recommend that is done in a hurry as much as possible, right?
Right.
Of course, when the need arises, there is no other way to do that. Maybe find a way to get it done elsewhere, at say a slightly higher cost, but no long-term liability, right? So that you are ensuring that again that the quality filter is not diluted, right? So you just have to weigh the pros and cons at that time. But yeah, as a general rule of thumb, I would just go, as I said, fairly slow on it, and then whoever comes in, really test them continuously, right? Because it's uh, it is really not a great feeling to have when you think that you know everything, right? And then I'm perfect at my job, and but it just gives you a very false sense of self-importance and ego, which is essentially not helpful for yourself or for the organization as a whole, right? So of course, it takes a lot of energy and time from the manager's standpoint to make sure that it is that they themselves are honest, and then they're able to keep you honest. Culture is all about communicating, right? Culture is about communicating through words, through behaviors, right? Through setting up the right sort of systems, right? Like for example, you know, if you want to build a trust-based culture, right? Simple things like how do you file expenses, uh, can be demonstrative. That how many layers of clearance you have to go through, how many bills you have to submit to get your expenses cleared, right? If it's a trust-based system, they say, okay, every day you can spend this much. We don't care. You don't need to give the bills, right? We expense you, and of course, when we randomly audit, if anything is found wrong, then stricter actions is going to be taken, right? So that is trust-based. Other is okay. We have no trust in you. Just file everything. File petrol bills also, file food bills also. This that, right? So it's about, and all this is communication,
Yeah.
in a way, right? So everything that you do, and that's one of the difficulties of being a leader, that you are being constantly watched, not only what you are saying, but what you are doing and how you are behaving, right? And you have to hold yourself to the highest of standards in all of these matters, because otherwise, all these talks of transparency, culture, communication, all these sort of break down, right? So yes, it's important, but not just in words, but also in action.
Awesome.
I can relate to this like so much, right? In terms of what you're just saying, Gaurav, because I was like 22 years old when I started working. I had a team of 55 people who were on average twice my age, who reported, right? And it was harrowing, right? Because people would look at you at all points of time. If you came into the shop floor one morning and you were not smiling and you were not upbeat and energetic, you would bring down the entire energy of the all, right? People would think today is a light day. आज मैनेजर चिल ले रहे हैं, हम भी चिल ले सकते हैं. आज प्रोडक्शन कम होगा तो चलेगा. And even smaller things, like you walk past the shop floor, you see a piece of scrap lying on the ground. If you don't pick it up, the shop floor is going to become a dustbin a week later, because like, अरे manager ने कचरा नहीं pick किया, तो हम क्यों करें? It is, so it's something that I resonate with a lot. That I think, what you were saying at the very beginning, that culture is ultimately is the set of behaviors and practices that management considers to be acceptable, right? At the end of the day, I think one of the examples I think about a lot, and I remember my then plant manager at PNG, Manu Mahajan, always talked about, was Indigo, right? That what is it that Indigo incentivizes? Okay, things have changed today, maybe it's not the same, but what is it that Indigo incentivizes, right? It was all of the small individual behaviors. How fast are you unloading baggage? How fast are you turning the vehicle around, right? For the person who's cleaning the seats, right? Once the vehicle has landed, how fast are you getting the cleaning job, right? So that focus on speed was just a part of everybody's KPI at all different levels. And, that's something that definitely resonates. One of the other things I wanted to understand is, maybe when you're a small company and you're still growing, you can move fast, you can break things, you'll have churn in an organization, attrition is to be expected. The org will outgrow people at times, right? And then there are early stage folks, there are growth stage folks. People will want to leave saying, hey, now the org's become too large. This is no longer interesting. I'm a 0 to 1%. And then somebody else will come in who will say, hey, I'm a 1 to 10%. I wasn't right for 0 to 1 anyways. I'd like a little bit of more structure to work with. But as you scale, as you grow, attrition becomes important, right? You don't want to be known as a place where people are churning out constantly, because then you will have trouble hiring the best talent. So would you talk to us a little bit, about how do you think about retention, right? Which also becomes the next important part after hiring and enablement, and rewards recognition, especially in slightly larger organizations where you're dealing with a large number of staff, right? Who are not necessarily part of leadership. Is R&R important, right? Or is it just a bloated big company thing? Or is it something that even startups and growth stage companies need to prioritize and think about? So how do you think about retention? How do you think about R&R? Does it play a role in making your org successful? Would love to hear your perspective there.
Sure. So see, I think R&R is important, right? I don't think it's the most important thing, right? Uh, because the risk is that you end up making a lot of good behavior very transactional, right? If you start incentivizing people on, on as a like basic behavior, and maybe who knows, you took example of Indigo, and that is what has happened now. Who knows? Because it used to be great, not anymore. Because if you are trying to incentivize every single thing, that I will give you 10 rupees for this and 20 rupees for this and 30 rupees for this, then you essentially just lose sight of the larger goal, and keep optimizing for yourself, and don't even think about how your actions might be affecting the overall value chain. And are you doing it in a way that also helps the people who have to do their job after you or before you or whatever. And so it just breaks the link, right? So yes, like for example, I believe that ESOPs have to be universal, right? It should not be just for very few top people, but across the organization, so that when uh, wealth creation happens, the benefits trickle down to everyone, right? And people are in it for the right reason, and people are in it for the long term, right? So for me, R&R philosophy is just keep it very, very simple. Keep it very easy to understand and communicate, right? Because it's like, for example, you are part of a loyalty program, right? And if you just don't understand it, right, what is the point? And people do that okay, X% on grocery, Y% on food, Z% on this. Who remembers that? Yeah? Right. So similarly, R&R, right? For loyalty program to work, why Jet Privilege, I believe, was the best loyalty program, because first the flights were great. You try putting Jet Privilege on a third class airline, the loyalty program has no meaning, right? So first, for R&R to have meaning, first your the culture, the company, all that has to first fall in place. Then how simple and meaningful that is, right? That it is really going to change people's lives when it sort of comes into effect, and just leave it at that. And that's why, again it comes down to, it's important that you have people in the organization who care about the mission and not about how much incentive or how much money they're going to make. Because reward is improbable, and you don't know when it's going to come to you, but the pain is deterministic, frequent, and almost daily. Right? So and that is what you need to solve for, more than R&R. And what you see is, because it is not easy to do, right? People resort to all these random R&R policies just to kind of keep the morale high. But that's, I believe, is a losing game all the time.
Understood. Got it. Thank you so much. We've sort of covered, I think, the first very important segment, right, which is on the conceptual and operational aspects of hiring, of building teams, of implementing culture. Moving to the second part, that people sort of wanted to understand, and which, in my experience, has been one of the most important aspects of the great leaders I've worked with, are the soft skills, right? It's about being mature, about being empathetic, especially in ops, where you might be managing people who are either older to you at an early career, or just managing a lot of people, right, who come from different backgrounds, have different perspectives, different incentives. I think the first question, right, and this is a question that I think everybody has asked at some or the other point of time. As a new manager, as a new leader in an organization, how do you get buy-in? How do you earn trust? How do you build respect, right? Because you can't just step into a role. Sure, there's the authority aspect of it. Hey, you report to me, so I'm telling you, you do something. But that's transactional in a way. It's not going to work for a very long time, right? I mean, your own ability to rise in an organization, your ability to deliver your own metrics is going to be very limited to that perspective. So, meaningful aspect, right? You're a new person, you have people to manage, you have a team to manage at different levels, different capabilities, different competencies, education, background, whatever it may be, right? how do you get buy-in? How do you build trust? And how do you sort of earn, respect in an organization? Would love to hear your point of view. And if there's an example here that can be played back to the audience, it would be awesome. Given that you've been a new manager or a new leader in so many different organizations at different stages of their journey.
Sure. So see, it's very simple again that, manager itself, boss, it's a very alien concept, right? In overall scheme of things and in how nature has evolved, right? So nature has caregivers, who are your parents, and parental love, for example, is across species, then and then of course, we as humans have put in all these systems in place, for whatever reason. But the fundamental thing is that nobody in their right minds, I think, likes a manager or a boss. So it is automatically a very difficult position to be in, because who likes authority? Unnecessary authority. Right? So, if the worst thing that you can do is you step into a new role and you say, okay, I'm the boss, right? I know everything. I'm going to tell you what to do. Okay. And if you're not going to do that, there'll be repercussions, right? Just absolutely stupid rookie move, right? I think what people are looking for fundamentally, people are looking for somebody to come in and help them grow, help them remove obstacles, that are in their path of growth or whatever they are trying to do, right? And I think that is where you need to be starting from. That you go in, you really understand the problems, right? Because this whole thing about, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, right? So now nobody brings their problems, and the problems remain unsolved because they themselves are struggling with the solution, right? So they don't have the solution, they will also not tell you the problem, right? And so you really need to understand the problems, right? And there is a very high probability that you will also not have the solution, because you have not spent that much time and energy on the problem as the concerned person might have had, right? But you need to then work with them to be able to solve that problem in whatever way possible, right? And it doesn't matter what the result is going to come from. Whatever the result is, right? Whether you solve the problem, whether you get stuck with it, whether you give up, whatever. But when you kind of go through that journey together, right, there is this inherent trust that builds in the relationship, right? And essentially, what is culture? Another definition of culture is this scaling of trust, right? That people just trust that you will do the right thing for what is needed, and then they will do the right thing for what is needed, right? So for a new manager, I think just it's of course a lot of ego boost, that you have a span, and so many people report to you and all that. But I think the moment you realize that uh, it's a great responsibility, right? And the weight of that responsibility, when you start feeling that on your back, you know that's when you say that, okay, how am I able to do a better job at it? And that can only be when I am able to take these people along, that they can trust me, and I'm sort of I'm an enabler for them, and not a monitor, right? That's the distinction, right? And if you are operating from an enabler mindset, I think things become fairly easy, right? And if you start operating from a monitor mindset, things will become incredibly hard, right? So yeah.
This is brilliant, because I had a parallel question which I don't need to ask anymore, because I think you've answered both in one go, which was this exact aspect, right? That people are often worried, right, about putting employees, junior subordinates forward, right? Knowledge is often protected, right? You operate with a scarcity mindset with your team at times, rather than an enabler mindset, and I think you've just hit that point right on the head. If you have to tell people you're the boss, you're not the boss, right? Is probably the simplest way to think about it. And it's not like the org which needs to live up to you. It's you who needs to live up to the org, at least in your early days, before you can start asking for things from people, to sort of live by example and walk the walk, so as to speak, do things, spend time with the organization. And I resonate with this like incredibly, right? Like first 6 months, I remember I was at PNG, I would just sit in the cabin and ask people ki ye kyun nahi ho raha hai, wo kyun nahi ho raha hai. And then at some point of time, somebody asked me, ki, do you even know? Have you even been to the shop floor? Have you tried a piece of maintenance yourself that you're asking us you want this task done in 15 minutes? Right? Is it even possible? Is it reasonable? And it all changed for me, I think, very significantly when I started going there and seeing things and doing that. And of course, I mean, I was no expert in maintenance or running machines or any of these things. Just the willingness to get your hands dirty rather than expect the org will deliver, I think was where things started to change for me. I'm sure Shogoto, PSV and everybody else on the call will also have their own set of experiences with this whole thing, right? Like when things changed.
So in fact, I would like to just state an example, like a story. First day on the job, very first day of my professional life, we went to Japan, right? And day one, uh, we were told that the entire floor will meet us at the lift lobby, right? For our introduction and everything at 2 o'clock. Okay. Now, of course, it's a new place, beautiful place and everything. We are just loitering around after lunch. This was like right after lunch. Lunch hours is 1 to 2. And 2 o'clock, we have to meet at the lift lobby. At 1:55, we are just at the ground floor, chit-chatting with other people. And the secretary of a boss is like huffing, puffing, and oh, where are you guys? Where are you guys? We're gonna get late, right? And said, okay, we तो 5 मिनट बाकी है, मतलब क्या टेंशन क्या है, right? And but no, chalo, let's go. So let's go, right? So three of us. Now we are on the 8th floor. It's lunch rush hour. There are many lifts, but it will take some time, right? So lifts took their own sweet time. We reached the floor at 2:02. Okay. Everybody on the floor was there. Okay. As soon as we get out of the lift, we get a round of applause. More to shame us. How can you buggers be 2 minutes late in Japan on your first day of work? Right? And like very seldom in my life, I have felt so ashamed of myself. Right? And since that day, right, I cannot get anywhere deliberately late. Right? If I'm 5 minutes, if I'm going to be 5 minutes late, I'm going to tell everybody beforehand that I'll be 5 minutes late. Right? But more or less, I'll be before time possible, because I think it's just, but as Shogoto said, that it just sends such a wrong signal, right? And as you kind of keep rising, it's all about signals, right? So yeah.
Completely relate, working for a Japanese organization right now, having been to Japan twice over the last year. This is very, very palpable, this particular example. And also what Shogoto said, right? Like culture takes a very, very long time to build, and it's super easy to destroy it by doing something that absolutely negates all of the behavior that's been built, right? So I think one of my at least strong takeaways or other reinforcements in that belief is that role modeling, like there is no exception, right? There is no excuse for not role modeling the right behaviors. And it's almost as if with your behaviors, the way you're acting, the way you're presenting yourself, you're deliberately or unconsciously designing your organization to behave in a certain way, right? I remember my plant manager Manu again always said, right, like that org design is there are no mistakes in org design. It's deliberate, whether by omission or by commission. Your org is going to perform exactly how it's been designed, and only you are responsible in many ways from having designed your org. As we maybe move to sort of the end of the conversation, one of the last things that we wanted to understand from you is again something that's often talked about. Very few people know how to do it, and it's usually done very poorly in most organizations. is the aspect of feedback, right? We've spoken about how you do things right, people will follow, but what happens when they don't? What happens when you have to have, a harsh conversation with somebody? What is it when you have to tell someone that they're not living up to the mark? Especially more so in operations, if it's, with folks who are very many in number, who are maybe at times older than you, or whoever it may be, right, in your organization that you have to give feedback to. How do you sort of do this, right? Have these candid, these sometimes uncomfortable conversations with people who report to you. How do you do it in a respectful, but at the same time in an effective manner that gets the point across? Do you have, some concepts here that have worked for you, right, on giving feedback and ensuring that it works, but that it doesn't break morale at the same time because people aren't like upset by what has happened?
Sure. So, see, first thing is nobody wants to be lied to. Okay. And people very easily can understand that if you are bullshitting. Right. So, before you are able to give any feedback, right, the whole system, how do you drive trust, right? And that trust has to be driven by you, first of all, being very, very transparent about your own actions, right? That you are on a constant basis owning up to the mistakes that you are doing, right? And be very categorical about it that, okay, this is where I screwed up. I should have done this way. Maybe I should have checked with you or whatever, right? Uh, so, and so you have to, as I said, be very, very brutal to yourself, right? You have to be, before you are, to stop bullshitting anyone, you first have to stop bullshitting yourself, right? Because it is so very easy to lie to yourself. And then when you start lying to yourself, it then becomes very, very easy to lie to others, right? So when you start holding yourself to that standard, and people see that, right? Everybody sees that, right? And once that trust is established that yes, this person is truthful, then I think you have great leverage in being able to communicate anything that you want, uh, you know, in a respectful manner, right? And I've had many such conversations, and uh, it of course has to be pointed, right? It of course has to, you should have observed certain things. You should have data points to do that. And when the other person thinks that you are coming from a, coming with this feedback in a very genuine, methodical, and trustworthy manner, it is not as difficult as people make it out to be. Because in general situation, why this awkwardness comes in is that all the time you have chosen to behave, in a very patronizing fashion, or in a not very truthful fashion. And when suddenly the day of reckoning comes in, you yourself are afraid that, okay, I have been guilty of so much, and now I have to go and tell the other person that you are guilty of so much, right? And what if that person shows me the mirror? That, who the hell are you to tell me I am wrong when you are wrong at so many counts, right? But when you yourself are admitting at the right points that you are guilty of that, then they have nothing on you, uh, right? And they know that, what you are also saying is coming with the best intentions, and in a truthful manner, and that just makes it much easier, right? So I think again, it's something that people, because of their insecurities, make the situation more complicated than it probably is.
No, this is brilliant. I think, and there's so many examples that people give, right? The so-called shit sandwich, where you give feedback that's like, okay, you say something good, then say something harsh, then say something good again. But all of that is just pretense, right? Ultimately, none of that is necessary if your if your team trusts you to begin with, because they've seen you sort of uphold the behaviors and standards that you're now holding them accountable to, uh, all throughout, right? And whenever you've fallen short, as you said, you've owned up to mistakes. I remember, like, I've had so many of these conversations myself, very early on in my career with folks who were working with me. And I always remembered one of the things that was very important was, as you said, to be very fact based and to be very pointed. It becomes very, very easy to tell people you always do something like this, right? The moment you make it a continuity, the moment you make it a reflection on the person's character, as opposed to their specific shortcomings from a capability or a behavior standpoint, you lose that person in the conversation completely. because then it becomes about ego and it's not about objective reality anymore, right? I think that's one other thing that I would maybe add here. That if you make it about ego, it's super hard to get a point across to the other person, because then they have no option but to defend themselves because they're losing respect, sort of otherwise. Gaurav, as we've sort of, worked through all of these examples, understood the hiring, the team aspect, we've understood, the maturity aspect of these things, right? Of how you sort of own up to being a good leader. What are your, these learnings that you've now taken? How are you applying them to building ventures and mentoring founders at 2070 Health, right? For people who are startup operators, like say Tejasvi, for folks who are working in startups, building startups, or in, how do you sort of, more specifically, maybe looking at that part of our community audience, what is
Sure.
it that you would have to say to them, right? Because they may not have so many systems, they may not have so many structures, they may not have like 100 years of organizational culture to leverage, right? To ask somebody to do something, because hey, that's just how we do things, right? That doesn't exist at many of these places. So, what are your sort of, your guidance, your mantra for founders and for folks working in much newer, much younger organizations where the culture is being built as we speak?
Sure. So, few things, one, just to improve the probability of success, right? Some of the things that I tell my founders, right? One is be very, very clear about where you want to get, right? Because otherwise, what happens is that you are, again, the struggle is real in startups, right? And you are every day trying to move some metric or the other. And over time, you simply forget, that what is the overall objective, why we started it, why we are doing it, and you just start going through the motions, and it just becomes very uh, uh, you start feeling the weight on your shoulders, right? But what keeps you going is, have you really thought through in a very, very unconstrained manner, right? Because your resources might be limited, but your thinking need not be, right? So how can you think in a very, very unconstrained manner in terms of where do you want to get to? Because, I have realized that your ambition is eventually going to translate into reality, and the higher you can aim, the farther you will go, you know and that's the only difference that I have seen between people with reasonable success and people with outstanding success. It is just the amount of ambition and drive they have, and the kind of goals that they set for themselves, right? So set very, very lofty, clear goals, but make sure that every step you are taking is very firm, right? So don't dabble in 20 things. There is always this fatal attraction towards, okay, let's be opportunists, let's do this, let's do that, let's do 5 things, something will stick. It doesn't happen that way, unfortunately, right? You just have to commit to a path, be very sure of that path, right? And just walk steadily on it, right? And hopefully things will work out well, right? So it's important that you do it in a firm footing. Uh, make sure that you are fit at every point in time. Very clear eye on cash, very clear eye on unit economics. You really don't need to grow for the sake of growing. You know, growing for the sake of growing is cancer. You don't need to get that disease, right? Remain small till the time you have figured out what needs to be done. So, fitness first, velocity and scale later, right? And for this, speed is very, very important, right? To everything you do. But as you know, speed and velocity are two completely different things, right? So focus on velocity, right? So speed is important, but directionless will kill you, right? So these are the fundamental things, and whatever we have, because see, every in early stage startups, right? Why I enjoyed so much, because nobody knows the answer. Right? So everybody's trying to figure it out, right? Nobody's an expert. How product market fit is going to be achieved for A company versus B company are totally different, right? And so it is any VC or any studio, any incubator, None of them is a factory. You cannot produce it like a factory because they are just very, very different. Right. So you're constantly, so it just these set of fundamentals, if you can focus on, largely things turn out to be okay. Right. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. I think with that, we are at time. And, we've kept you on this call for almost 90 minutes. I'm sure you have other things to do on a Saturday evening, as do the folks on the call. But this was an absolutely brilliant session. I think we had a lot of engagement. We had a bunch of different, really, really impactful concepts that you were able to share with us. And you said things in a way which was different, right? Which we've not heard from a lot of other folks in this space, right? I think your views on leadership are very, very real. They come from a deep wealth of experience across doing things at different places, at different times, at different scale. And it was honestly a privilege for us to be able to have this conversation and, to get your unfiltered and candid opinions and perspectives on how to do some of these things. Thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us. And thank you everyone who was here on the call, who engaged, who participated, who listened, for giving your time to make this session successful.
No, thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. Privilege again, to be sharing these. I won't say insights, but something that I have learned, and there's clearly, as I always say that it's uh, uh, business is done at two levels, right? There is a chess level and there is Mario level. Right? Chess is where you are thinking and Mario where you are playing, right? And as you sort of move up the ladder, you unfortunately move more from Mario, which is more fun, to chess, which is very consuming, but adds a lot of value, right? And businesses, sometimes people feel that operations can be repetitive, and I get bored. But I think if you really care about a business, right, there you can never get bored because there is no perfect business. If you care deeply, you will always find ways of improving it, right? And something that I've again learned from experience, right, that and especially being a parent, that there are kids and there are dogs, right? Kids grow up, right, and they become independent, and they move on with life. Business are like dogs, right? You think that they are doing okay, but leave them alone for 2 days, okay, and something bad will happen, right? So it doesn't matter how big the business is, whether it's a Shih Tzu or it's a, German Shepherd, right? You have to care, till the time the business is alive. No business of any scale can be left on its own at any point in time. It fundamentally, as a soul, it never grows up, right? And so that's what sort of keeps the fun and the joy in operations and in whatever you choose to do, right? And I hope that I'm still in the process of finding purpose, right? A lot of my, as you would have learned, a lot of my life has been spent more about eliminating choices than making very conscious choices. I know very well what I hate doing. I still don't know what I really love, right? And but I hope that each one of you is able to find that purpose, that thing that you can sort of where you can play the long game and see some phenomenal success. So good luck, and thanks again for having me here. Thanks a lot for your time.